This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod.
All right, and it is a very dark room. I'm actually in a pretty dark room. There should be separate theme. We might have to do separate theme music, like some kind of Darth Vader. No? Okay.
Right. I put the kibosh on it.
Fair enough. Good. I like it. That's easier.
No more changes, Brad. No more changes. Too much change coming to your favorite podcast, your favorite obscure arts books category podcast, which is rocking the charts in Sweden.
And Denmark, I think.
Hungary
is the big one. Yeah. What's up, Hungarians? Yeah.
Right. Fly us over. We'll fly, coach.
Yeah, we don't care.
We don't care.
Yeah. So it's excited to come back. We had a busy weekend, and then we were right back at it, which is cool. I'm stoked. We have a guy who's been with us before. It's Mr. Godward on to talk about the great Philip K. Dick. Now, people who have been with us for a while know we did a in-depth full bio core episode with our friend Forrest of Symbols a while back. So, we're not doing that whole thing. We're not going to dive into the entire PKD lore, but we've got, I think, some really cool stuff to talk about. We've been talking back channel, kind of figuring out where we want to go with this. And I'm excited. Philip K. Dick is one of my favorite subjects. He's relevant always about everything. I think that's fair to say. So anyway, Godward, welcome. Thank you for coming back. We did a Darkroom episode with you about Franz Kafka, I don't know, a few months back. That was awesome. One of my favorite conversations we've had on the show. So thank you so much for your time and coming back and hanging out with us.
Absolutely. I'm glad that's the right transition too. I wanted to mention Kafka at the start of this because, I want to maybe contribute to the podcast just by saying, just by asking Kevin, is Philip K. Dick a hack?
No,
that's right.
No, PKD is not a hack.
He's not a hack.
He's not a hack, right? Because I think the reason I say Kafka was a hack is because, of course, it's ironic. Mm-hmm. It is that Kafka. I try to imagine Kafka behind the counter at a middle American strip mall for a week, or managing a Chipotle. That's all I mean. Yeah. And of course, it's a very Kafka-esque statement to say that Kafka was a hack. Of course, we admire his work. I'm not saying he was a terrible writer. I'm saying that he wouldn't last a week managing a Target during the holidays, for example.
But also, sorry.
No, just real quick. I did hear from somebody that I know here who said she was in California at one point, in Southern California, and there was a fellow managing a grocery store with a name tag, Kafka. She asked him. He said, "I'm his great nephew."
What?
I think it was Kenneth Kafka.
No way.
So poor Kenneth. You know what? Maybe the Kafka line. Maybe they have adapted to Clown World.
That's why I asked you the question. Is that I think, in some ways, Empire has swallowed up Kafka. Everybody is Kafka now. We all have to go to the DMV. We all know how crazy everything is in that way. But I do think Philip K. Dick took it to the next level in a scary, terrible way. And there are people who aren't there yet, who haven't experienced the type of alienation and this, certainly the 2-3-74 thing that he experienced. And for him, that experience, the way that I understand PKD is the distance between the experiences that he's having and the ability to express them, like to share those experiences with other people, it leaves this like it creates this weird sort of disconnection socially. And now, like, can you trust people or not? And this is sort of the birthplace of all this paranoia, that bubbles up. And man, so PKD is not a hack.
No. And the fact of the matter is, it is an American world now, for better or worse. The empire it has American features, and for all their genius, these European writers, Kafka, even Nietzsche, the thing they could never have predicted, even Orwell, Huxley, these fellows, it was the Americanization of everything.
Yeah.
And so it stands to reason that an American writer like PKD would, and of course he's more recent, but also supremely American and Californian. In a way, it's a Californian world.
Kevin, I love that you're hitting this point, because in the After Dark, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about Philip K. Dick within the context of what Harold Bloom, the great literary critic, the greatest of literary critics, perhaps, called the American religion. So we're going to fit that in. It's going to tie in exactly what you're talking, but I think we're even going to go weirder, because part of the American religion is weird. It's so weird you can't really even put other words on it sometimes.
So love it. Let me just get some housekeeping out of the way. You reminded me. So every episode we do an After Dark, an extra 30 minutes. Sometimes it goes an hour. It's a mini episode that tags on to every single episode we do. This is a darkroom episode, which means we're talking about one of our core subjects who we covered, Philip K. Dick. Darkroom episodes run about an hour. We'll do another 30 minutes on the After Dark for Patreon subscribers only. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Our goal for 2023 is to have at least 333 Patreon subscribers. The rate goes to
There's
get
no
in.
Significance to that number, is there?
No.
Okay.
Well, it's just it's half a Crowley.
Okay.
Yeah. And
that Crowley episode, by the way, it was one of the first things I've had to quit for fear of going to hell in a long time. Like I needed a break. Like
Mr. Crowley.
Congratulations.
Sweet. All right, good. That's the goal of the show. We're getting it from all sides now too. And hopefully you took to heart what I said about why it's important to understand Crowley, even if you are afraid for your soul when you listen to it. So anyway, we're going for 333. The rate right now to get through the door is $3 a month. That is going to go up because of inflation and because of the crypto market imploding, and all sorts of other reasons. That's going from 3 to 5 on January 1st. People who get in at 3 get grandfathered in. So if you want to get in, be an early supporter of the show. When you meet us in Budapest, you can say, "Hey, I was number 58 to support the pod." That'll be extra cool. Please do that. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod. And Book Club. Coming. Book Club, Readers Club coming 2023. We're going to do a lot of cool stuff for the Patreon folks. We love you. And listen, if you can't shell out the money, or if you're whatever, if things are tight or you're not feeling it, the least you could do, if you like the show, you like what we're doing, you like the 7 hours of Crowley that we did between the main episode and the Patreon, go give us 5 stars on iTunes. Leave a comment. We are trying to hack the algo. We too are hacks, like our friend Franz. So help us hack the algo. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Boom. That's excellent.
Boom.
Thank you.
Right,
Thank you.
good.
That was all very good. So let's just go to kind of back up. Where do you start with Philip K. Dick? Is there like a moment where you discovered him, kind of?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Okay.
The moment I discovered him was like almost saved my life in a way. Like because this is hard to talk about, but I am one of those people who's had, liminal. It's dangerous in 2022 to even to talk about this kind of thing. But experiences that I couldn't explain to a credentialed psychiatrist. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be careful. Like you have to be careful about how to express it. So I didn't encounter Philip K. Dick until after that happened to me. And so part of what was so merciful or whatever in a way that was that I immediately recognized what happened to him, which is that it's some anomalous, non-ordinary psychological, spiritual experience. And then you're faced with, you basically have to become the interpreter. you know. So it was, for me, it was Valis, like, amazingly and sort of, I guess, coincidentally or something. And I felt like, okay, here's a person. By the way, it wasn't the first. I mean, there are, of course, others. You can read lots of testimonies in, like, William James's Varieties of Religious Experience, or like in the Catholic mystics or whatever.
But they're everywhere through history.
They're everywhere,
right? Yeah.
But the scales have to fall from your eyes first before you can really sort of, like, distinguish this kind of writing from sort of other sorts of writing. And so I think I was about 29 probably when I first got into reading his books. And I think, like I was saying right before we started, I was going to go into this, and I'll tell you now that, like, the concept that straightened it all out for me and really sort of changed the way I think about my life and life is where he talks about empire, like with kind of a capital E, as being, the empire never died. Like, as I was going to say before we started, this is what happened to Moses, right? Like, Moses was raised in Egypt, adopted or whatever, but basically raised in the Pharaoh's court as Egyptian royalty in the empire. And it was only, like, when he was 40 years old, I think the Bible talks about this, that he's much older when he starts to identify with the slave who's out there getting beat up, and he realizes, actually, that's me. Like, I'm not next in line to be the emperor. I'm with them. That's like a tremendous reorientation of your sense of self, your place in the universe, your psyche. And it's not easy. Like, it takes work to kind of rebirth yourself. You know what I mean? Like, that experience of, I mean, I think of it as being the essence of spiritual things, of religion even. Like, I'm not joking when I say I'm sort of a Dickian Christian, that's,
I remember you saying that.
A real thing to me.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. And ever since you did, I've wanted to ask you what that means. And I know we're going to have more to say about that. But I love this because this does suggest, it ties a little bit into something that Kevin and I talked on the Astral Flight Simulator podcast, where we destroyed realism, the concept of realism, where and you see this in in the Moses story, but you also see this in the story of Buddha, right? Where he's confined to this space where apparently everything is being provided for him. And then as soon as he sees that the wider reality doesn't obey these rules, it's a reality distorting experience, right? And we do that now. It's sort of like we were joking on that we were talking on that show about, like, there is no such thing as realism, and the idea that this weird spreadsheet world that we're kind of forced to live in is the real world. It's almost, as soon as you see outside of it at all in any way, it looks like a farce. It looks kind of like, it almost looks like a joke from
this inside. Is why having multiple languages, learning multiple languages, is so essential, because the language is the operating system for your own dreams, in a way, for your own everything. It's the operating system. And English, of course, is so horrifically fraught.
I love English, though.
I do too. I do too. And things really I'm a crotchety old man. Oh, they really went to hell when they stopped teaching Latin. So right, there's that, and then also travel.
Yeah, definitely.
The number of Americans who don't have, I can hear people going, it's a big country and we got 50 states. The number of Americans who don't have a passport. And I understand we're poor. Like, people are poor. I get it. But it's like, oh my God, you got to put a priority on language learning, and you've got to put a priority on travel. Full stop.
Yeah, no, it's true. And let me add one to that list, Kevin. And like, they're going to call us rootless cosmopolitan liberals or whatever, but it's true. In some sense, it's true. And that is, the third one would be drugs. And you guys talked about this in the core episode, but, like, I'm not an advocate of drugs. I've done few drugs. Like, I'm not a psychedelic user, for example, but it doesn't take much. It only takes, probably you can get away with this with caffeine or with alcohol, maybe with pot or something like this. What it gives you is just enough that you realize, like, the mind is not quite the self, or if it is, like, what does that mean? That you can take a substance and seemingly become something else, entirely, it feels like, in some cases. And this definitely, you guys talked about the amphetamines and stuff with PKD. I mean, I think he probably already had a little of, like, what I think I probably have, which is, it's like the opposite of ADHD, where you have kind of like a surplus attentive disorder or something, like where you're just my wife says I'm sucking too hard on my lollipop sometimes. Like I'm just
it's like what's your I'm your interviewer at a job interview. Hey, Godward, what's your biggest fault?
My biggest weakness.
Too much
well, I'll read
attention
to the bottom of the Wikipedia page and read the footnotes.
That's awesome. That's a superpower now, though, man.
It is. And I think like he seems like he probably, I mean, if you've ever, have you guys looked at the exegesis? Like I've
thumbed through it. I have not read every word, but
it's only, I think the major public, the version I had of it anyway, I don't remember who published it, but it's like 1,000 pages long. But apparently the whole exegesis was like 8,000 pages long. So here's a guy who, like, he's drilling to the bottom, right?
And that's on top of writing as much fiction as anybody ever wrote. Basically,
it's really amazing what this guy was doing. But like, I do think that it's one of the themes that recurs through like many of the books. I'm thinking of like Ubik, for example, or like I can't think of others, but like where, some version of a drug or a pill or whatever, like either sort of cordons off a part of the experience, or, he's thinking about what it means to do these things. And I just remember myself being in my late 20s, having this kind of, I guess I usually call it like an interesting mystical experience or something like that. But then it's like, well, okay, I did smoke pot the week before. So, a real skeptic will go, well, that explains it, so nothing actually happened.
Right.
But even so, it's like, it was real to me. What does this mean? How am I going to process this? And I think like you can see him spending the 10 years after 74 doing that, basically just reinterpreting, trying to figure out what that was.
Right.
But I think it would be foolish to say it was nothing. It was all delusion.
Yeah, I think this is where you come away with it. It's like, okay, so maybe he had schizophrenia, or maybe he had amphetamine induced psychosis, right? But like, really, to me, with my personal experiences, those things belong in the discussion of what the content of the experience is, but they do not obliviate them. They do not throw them all aside. It doesn't work that way.
I'll do you one better and say, even if it is delusion, that doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
The same way that I think that realism doesn't exist. It's almost like delusion has, in terms of the artistic, in terms of even the spiritual, delusion is almost, it carries the same weight. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of old hat to say that mental illness is really just mental illness because it's defined that way by society, but that's actually true, right? I mean, they're like, so someone I know in Minecraft recently drank ayahuasca, and
how was that?
If you ask them, they had a pretty amazing experience.
Brad is dissociating on the pod.
Yeah.
And there it is.
Yeah. So, but what was quickly, I mean, there's so many things kind of come out of that, right? And what you notice in the people who've just walked out of that experience talking about it, it is more real as an experience than the conversation they're having afterwards is a real experience. It is so deeply real that like it actually, it seems like what's afterwards is the dream, and what was happening in there was real, and what's happening in there is ineffable. It's
absolutely, and like Dick writes about this all the time. He says, it was as if I was sleeping my whole life and woke up, or I was deluded my whole life and then became sane. Like that's, what a fun idea that is. And of course, like for me, I mean, this is, everyone talks about paranoia in his writing, but like, there's also the idea of metanoia, which is the Greek for like conversion. Right. And I mean, he's very explicit about this. Like he refers to Paul all the time, the apostle Paul on his horse getting knocked off on the road to Damascus. And like, it changes his life. It changes who he is. Right. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with here. And like, certainly, I mean, like I can think of a couple of examples. Like one of my favorite is a guy named Jones Very from like the 1840s. He was a little known friend of Ralph Waldo Emerson's. and had a similar sort of like apocalyptic, psychological, spiritual experience. And even then, they threw him in the psych ward. Like that's what you did even in 1840. So it's not like, yeah, we can say it's like it's old hat or it's a cliche or something at this point. But the truth is like that problem has been around, I think, probably basically forever, right? Because like, how about also John the Baptist and Jesus and Paul were all referred to as mad or possessed or crazy by their contemporaries, you know? So
yeah,
like,
the only the only people that seem to be able to, there are older societies, archaic societies have had a means of incorporating those people into their culture, right? Mm-hmm. So you would take a person, you know, in the shamanic traditions, many of the actual shamans are people who, from our perspective, lost their mind and then came back about halfway, right? Came back just enough. And it through a variety of means, you know, it could have been what we call now schizophrenia, could have been near-death experiences. It could have been, you know, the various rituals and drugs and whatever that they did then. But they had a means of putting it in society. Now they realized that that person wasn't the best person to be the chief, say. Wasn't maybe the best person to make decisions about who gets what, you know, who gets what resource or whatever. But it was critical to have that person and incorporate that into the overall functioning of the society. And we just put, that's nonsense. We just push that aside because, you know, the thing that you said doesn't actually follow this strict logical algorithm we have on this chalkboard, so it can't be true. So you're a crazy, and we don't have room for you. Yeah.
And this is, by the way, like this is what, like I'm doing this read through of the Old Testament this year with some guys in a, you know, group chat.
That sounds awesome.
It's kind of a slog. I haven't done it in 10 years, but like this is Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah. All these guys, like Isaiah walked around naked in bare feet, crying about the end of the world or whatever, like, and then they killed him for it, of course, right? Like these people don't get warm receptions. They're always written off as insane and usually killed or, you know, exiled or something like that. But you know, in retrospect, we often see like a prophetic air about what was going on, and I think I think people already start to recognize that about PKD.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about what he manages to be able to not get completely shoved aside because he writes entertaining work, right? He writes stuff that makes a cool movie. So you kind of keep him close rather than shove him aside. But he's no different than the guy, the Emerson's friend that you mentioned, right? He's having a very comparable experience to that guy.
You know, probably the classic analogy here. I mean, you can use the Truman Show or like Plato's Cave or whatever, you know, the guy who goes up and sees the reality. Mm-hmm. You can't just come back down and say it in sort of easy, like prose. It has to go through this like forge of transformation in order to present it to the people who are staring at the shadows, because they've never seen what you've seen. And so the language has to become like very intentional. And it's obvious that he's doing that. I mean, one of my favorite, you know, you guys, I think, touched on it, the speech he gave in France in 1977 or whatever. I don't remember the title of it, in Metz or whatever.
Yep.
And it's like, that is one of the most amazing performances I've ever seen. Like, it makes me cry almost. It's so good. You know what I mean? Like, it's because he sits like he's like acting, but he's not acting, and it's both, you know, true and fiction at the same time. And it's just an amazing thing that he sort of figured out. By the way, a lot of those essays in that reader that I mentioned to you are like that. It's called The Shifting Realities of PKD, or probably any collection of his essays.
Yeah, one you were mentioning was called Schizophrenia and something.
Yeah, the Book of Changes, he calls it, but
Changes.
It's the I Ching he's talking about.
Yeah. So what is, I mean, can you talk about that one a little bit? Is there
I mean,
gems in there?
It's pretty short and you can find it somewhere online, but it's let me just read you the funny excerpt first and then I'll sort of summarize it for you. I just printed off a little half a paragraph here. So you guys talked about the I Ching a little bit at the beginning of the core episode. He says, if you're totally schizophrenic now, which, by the way, isn't that the funniest way to start a paragraph? If you're like, he's talking to his schizophrenic readers. If you're totally schizophrenic now, by all means, use the I Ching for everything. including telling you when to take a bath and when to open a can of cat tuna for your cat Rover. If you're partially schizophrenic, then use it for some situations, but sparingly. Don't rely on it inordinately. Save it for big questions, such as, should I marry her, or merely keep on living with her in sin, etc. If you're not schizophrenic at all, kindly use the book in a very measured little way, in controlled doses, along the lines of your wise middle-class use of Gleam or whatever that damn toothpaste calls itself. You use the book as a sort of he says in parentheses, fun thing. Ask it the opposite sort of questions from what we partial schizophrenics do. Ask it questions the outcome of which can have no genuine bearing on your life. So, end quote. The overall theme of that essay is he sort of, introduces the idea of schizophrenia. Really interesting, by the way. He says the origin of schizophrenia comes when the world out there intrudes on your own sense of self. And the example he gives is being a 16-year-old with a crush on the girl in the class, and you're thinking all the time about how to get her to go out with you, and how you'll ask her out, and all the time you're thinking she doesn't even know you exist, and when you finally ask and she says no, he says that's the moment where some people can reconfigure the self and accept reality that way. And some people will sort of spiral out into this sort of florid schizophrenia.
Yeah, immediately create a frog avatar.
Exactly. Just get on Twitter and never come back.
Go right to Reddit, start green text posting.
Exactly.
Yeah. You found your calling.
So anyway, for what he's saying here is that schizophrenia is this thing, basically that the I Ching can sort of solve in a way, which I just find to be really fascinating. As you guys mentioned, this thing's 5,000 years old or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sort of makes sense to me in a way. It's sort of it takes the combinatorial. So every decision you make in your life has a combinatorial explosion hiding right underneath of it, right? Because you could do anything, right? And mostly us who are mostly sane, the large majority of decisions are fairly easy, mostly because we just do what we did last time. But if you aren't able to lock into that, having some kind of mechanism that is sort of imbued with this mystical, at least the sense that it's somehow mystical, would be an excellent guide, because it's I just do what this thing says now.
Yeah.
I have a question for Godward. You mentioned fearing for your soul, having listened to the Crowley episode. What is it about PKD that doesn't strike you that way?
Oh, it does. Yeah, it's very.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I guess the difference is that I recognized that he. That's a great question, Kevin. Because it's not easy. I feel very challenged by his writing, but I guess the fact that he keeps aiming at God and truth. I was even reading an essay about him and Heidegger's Aletheia, this idea of kind of undisclosing or revealing. So I guess he keeps the idea of true, capital T truth at the end of the tunnel as kind of the target. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I think of I was thinking actually almost more of did you guys ever read Robert Anton Wilson? He's right up there with Crowley as one of these chaos magician kind of, where it's I'm not always convinced they held on to that idea of truth. They almost started to surf in the postmodern uncertainty, and it does kind of frighten me. Frankly, it becomes directionless.
Yeah, and I think Crowley had good intentions in many ways, but I do think there became an aggregating power thing going on. With him. And whatever you say about Philip K. Dick, he's very rarely, if ever, trying to collect power for himself.
I think his, I was thinking, I said earlier, you have to be kind of cautious to even talk of these kind of spiritual experiences. I think generally it lowers even it now it and then it lowers social status to speak of what are almost like Pentecostal sorts of experiences. This is kind of like voodoo religion. We kind of make fun of
this
it.
is the thing they say about the sort of the WASP, I suppose, ethos is that you being demonstrative, being over demonstrative is almost the worst thing that you could do.
Exactly.
And we all kind of live under the shadow of that, whether or not the WASPs are still really in power.
Right.
Yeah, and I remember I was reading this. I can't even remember what the article was about him today, but he was, he wrote quite early on to Ursula Le Guin about this experience, and you can already tell he's like guarding the expression of it. Like he's talking about the Holy Spirit. He says, this is just a short quote: "The Holy Spirit had recently taken me over." He says in parentheses, "True, would I lie to you, Ursula?" "And had bidden me turn against the communist beast fascists who enslaved the world, exactly like our own Roman rulers. To me, on the basis of my religious experience, I feel in all honesty that we are in Rome again with the early Christians, persecuted and fighting for freedom." So like, I guess like I feel the same way as the reason I kind
felt
of
that acutely today, just today. In light of the elections and just looking around. Well, I mean, elections or not, it's a general feeling, but I feel that very clearly.
Yeah, well, just like it's the difference between when you can kind of talk openly and as yourself, and which is becoming harder and harder, right? Like you find people who think like you, get it, and it's one of the reasons that I'm pretty confident I'm not schizophrenic, is that I'm not saying I'm a glass of orange juice and you know what I mean? I'm like over here alone. I'm saying things that a lot of other people are saying too, not the majority, but enough that we're sort of recognizing the same patterns.
Yeah, you get a handful of people who more or less agree with you, at least in broad strokes. Then you can start feeling like, I'm not totally insane.
Well, and I think like if I finished rereading the Timothy Archer book recently.
I want to talk a bit about that. Yes.
It's just like, well, I mean, like, that Edgar Barefoot character in there is obviously like an Alan Watts figure. And it's like, I think, what a scene, right? First of all, like you ever see that video of Alan Watts's houseboat?
Yes.
Can I shout out one thing? So somebody just popped into the Telegram chat that we have, which is at t.me/artofdarkpod. You can find it through the website, artofdarkpod.com. And he found us through the Weird Studies podcast, like-minded folks. And he just said, have you ever done an episode on Alan Watts? Or are you thinking about doing Alan Watts? And so there you are. So we've got some synchronicity happening here. Of course, it's all kind of in the same arena, so it's to be expected. I also, in the background, I threw the I Ching, asking about the pod, and I am going to tease the Patreon After Dark. I'm going to read. Nice. I'm going to reveal what the I Ching has to say. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod. But yes, Alan Watts.
I was going to say, I only threw the I Ching once in my life, and it was like so spot on. That's another example. Like I do sometimes have these encounters with the synchronicities, or where it's like, I need a break, basically. Like I don't want to see the patterns anymore, because it's too like I don't know, it's just
this past weekend, folks who listen probably know I throw tarot. I threw tarot within 24 hours twice about two completely different questions, and I shuffle a lot. Like I shuffle very thoroughly, and when I think I'm done shuffling, I shuffle more. The same card popped out as the first card on both readings.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, okay, so this thing is nonsense, I'm sure. Right. You know what I mean? Like you have to take that seriously, right? Yeah. The nonsense explanation is like, I am not going to interrogate my mind at all. That's what the nonsense.
Right. Yeah. On the Crowley episode, I literally said, "Oh, that reminded me of the art card." Right. And that was the first card that we threw about Art of Darkness.
Yeah.
So you can buy it. You can buy like even a person who has none of these sort of whatever Philip K. Dick's sort of, I don't even like the word psychology or psychological, but whatever his psychological tendencies were. If you don't have any of those, it's not that hard, as long as you kind of are willing to sort of squint a little bit and have kind of soft eyes. It's not hard to find fingerprints of the kind of thing that he's talking about, right? Synchronicities, weird little stuff that doesn't really make sense, that makes gives you goosebumps. They're everywhere. The world is completely full of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and well, of course, like the idea of conspiracies also shows up in that way, and that's one of these things where it's like, I think for a lot of people, like obviously for a lot of people, for MSNBC viewers, for NPR listeners, like the phrase conspiracy theory is this kind of disqualifying thing right away.
Jazz flute Americans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, jazz flute Americans. Yeah. Right. But if you can just go, like, like hypothetically, like, this is part of the distance thing that I'm talking about again. And you can't, like, very often you can try so hard, you can set it up, like, very carefully. Like, actually, just tiny minor spoiler in the new Cormac McCarthy book. This isn't a plot spoiler, but he makes mention of the JFK assassination with some skepticism, with the idea that, like, maybe it wasn't just Oswald alone. And like that much is, if you can just go past like the official narrative, then I think you can start to hear somebody like PKD and, and like go down these corridors that are quite interesting.
The conspiracy thing is interesting because the concept of the black iron prison and Gnosticism more broadly, that is the conspiracy theory. And I don't say that to dismiss it at all, but that's all other conspiracy theories are sort of downstream of that one, in my opinion, right? They're all sort of details on that same conception. Yeah, that's really interesting. I have this thing I've done with people in real life where, they kind of know I'm interested in conspiracy theories, at least from like an anthropological standpoint, and or like a literary studies standpoint, because I think it's the most interesting genre of writing right now.
It's
basically
folklore. It
folklore. Is exactly. And I'll sometimes ask them, like, can you wrap your mind around why someone might believe that? Just to do that exercise. Like, why would that appeal to somebody as an idea? And like, that's sort of the first, you don't even have to buy into it. You don't even have to think it's true. It's like, what is the rationale for it? If you can put yourself in that mindset, then you're sort of on the way.
This is our like the 2022 version of the like negative capability. I think it was Keats wrote about that. Just the idea of it's just like hypothetically go with the other possibility. Maybe we didn't go to the moon or whatever. And if you are talking to somebody and they can't abide that for even a moment, they're not really there at the PK. It won't really click with them, I think. Right. And
I think part of the allure of the alternative explanation for the moon as well is that if, let's say, it was a media fugazi, that's as big an accomplishment as landing on the moon ever would be.
Yeah.
And that's the side I'm on, kind of. Yeah. So anyway, I'm able, well, it's like Ernst Jünger and the stereoscopic vision, the ability to entertain two thoughts at the same time. I know it's hard. Give it a try sometime. You might find that it makes you more creative.
Oh, it's the best. Yeah.
Speaking of that, I mean, towards the end, because you mentioned, can we just touch Timothy Archer for a second?
I want to talk about transmigration for sure. So yes,
it's I mean, I did write down at the back of my book, just because I knew I was going to come on here, like just in the first two chapters, here are some of the things I tweeted this out a minute ago, but in his first two chapters of this book, he mentions the Sufis, Proust, Honda Accords, which I think is interesting because it's like 1980. This is kind of before everyone had a Honda Accord. You know what I mean? Ashrams and the Vedas, Don McLean, Whitehead and process theology, Jacob Burma, autism, the Nag Hammadi text. Like, these are things that are just completely mind-blowing to a person born in 1928, like PKD. You know what I mean? Like, I know that we all live on the internet and we've heard of many of these things and they're kind of memes almost, but like, if you, like, I can picture my grandparents hearing that list and being like, just, no,
right.
Like,
it's too much. Yeah.
It's all
too
bad,
much.
Yeah.
So, well, no, I responded to your tweet because I had a similar list from chapter 4 that includes Captain Beefheart, Zadok, Wallenstein, who is this figure in the 30 Years' War, Grace Cathedral, which is this insane church in California, Hitler, Nixon, Howard the Duck, Ray Davies, Alcoholics Anonymous, Dixetry, which is like, and to even have this stuff at hand when you don't have the internet, to me, is kind of impressive. Just,
it's very amazing.
And it's not like he's connecting them. It's not like he's drawing a red string between each of them and saying, you know, but he's hitting you with like this wall of this chaotic wall of what it means to be alive at the end of the 20th century, right? It's like you have to deal with all of these things. Right.
Yeah. And the assassination of Lenin being sort of like the day on which most of this happens.
Yeah.
So he has this character in here named Bill Lundborg, who is schizophrenic and is, you know, in and out of the psych ward. And I mean, it's very hard to summarize this whole book, but like, you know, basically you've got the character based on what's his name, Jim Pike, who was a real Episcopalian minister. And then you've got he's talking about those Zadok texts. I didn't even look up. Are those real, or is that just another?
Yeah, so the Zadok texts are real, actually. Okay. And part of the deal with those is they came. There were some references to Zadok and Zadok was an individual person, supposedly. There's some Zadok material in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there are some interpretations in which people are drawing a line saying, you know, the thing that Jesus said in the Bible, Zadok actually said it, you know, however many years earlier.
Right.
So it's sort of like this proto-Jesus figure that's been kind of forgotten by history.
Yeah, actually Handel's Messiah. Is it Messiah? But he writes about Zadok the priest being like, there was already sort of a Christo, you know, proto-Christo figure, I guess. But anyway, yeah, the scene that's like so amazing to me, it's at the end of chapter 14 in this book where like, so basically everybody's dying around the narrator woman, and the Episcopalian minister guy goes to Jerusalem looking to like translate or see these texts and translate them and stuff. And then he doesn't come back. And then a few weeks go by or whatever, and she's all alone and kind of giving up and working at the record store. And finally this schizophrenic guy shows up at Edgar Barefoot's like houseboat for one of the lectures again. She hasn't seen him in a while. And he basically says like, I came back. It's me. And it's not Bill Lundborg, it's Timothy Archer. Like,
right.
And it's like, what? That is like it raises the hair on my head, because that's what happens at like the end of the Gospel of John. To a point where you're like, what actually happened there? Right. Like when Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb, she turns around and like the gardener is there. It says she thought he was the gardener. Isn't that a weird line?
That is
like,
weird.
What does that mean? Why would she think he's the gardener? She doesn't recognize Jesus.
Right.
So there's a moment, and then it's like, oh Lord, like she, you know, in like the Aristotelian or like the Sophoclean way, there's this moment of recognition that happens. And it's the same thing on like the road to Emmaus when the disciples are walking and like Jesus comes up to them, but they don't recognize him until he breaks the fish or whatever. And so then they go, oh, it's him. And like,
it's because he's he's like some kind of essence, right?
Yeah. Or like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a mystery, but like he looks somewhat different enough that the recognition didn't happen the way it usually does. You know what I mean? Like there was a gesture or something, and then they were able to recognize him. And so at the end of this book, like when this guy says that, and like given the context and everything that's been going on, there's just the possibility. You go like, is this possible? Like, did he really, you know, bodhisattva his way from Jerusalem back to the Bay Area?
Right. Right. And that's what's interesting about this book. So it's the last novel that Philip K. Dick writes, Transmigration of Timothy Archer. It's the closest probably to being, I think there's the most recognizable, what we would think of as real world elements in it. You know, with all the stuff we mentioned in our two lists, but also just it's not Valis, right? It's really about pretty much normal people, where this one strange phenomena is possible or happens, right? And in some ways that makes it sort of his most unsettling book to me, like, because I can handle like the pink laser beam from space stuff to a certain degree, because part of my brain just says, well, he's just this is just objective correlatives for a point he wants to make. But the transmigration of Timothy Archer stuff, it's like, yeah, this feels like it could be an actual thing going on, and I just haven't experienced it before.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's so, and Pike was an interesting figure. I mean, we talked a little bit about him on the core episode, but he's one of these guys who's sort of like the man of the 20th century, sort of he's the Bishop of California. And then he basically gets booted out of the church, but then he goes to the desert. He goes to the promised land he wants to basically seek evidence of Jesus.
Yeah, it's like he's following the John Marco Allegro thing about Jesus was a mushroom, maybe, or
See, in the book, in Transmigration of Timothy Archer, the book, that's what he does. But in I think in real life, he may have been doing that, but that sort of wasn't publicized. That part of it might not have been publicized. That's what they were going to do, because he had like, I was trying to find video of this, and I couldn't find it. Maybe it is out there. He went on a television show with a famous medium and got into contact with his son who'd committed suicide, on television, apparently, and really believed it, wrote a book about it and all of that. And that really kind of that kind of ruined his ability to stay in the church, I think.
Oh, sure. But like at the same time, that's like, that's the kind of thing that happened in the early church, so it's like, why do we do this thing where we draw the line in the year like 400 and we go, now miracles can't happen anymore?
Right.
And like Dick just basically reintroduces miracles in this book. He goes like, what if it did happen? And it's like, it's pretty startling. But
that's very good. And that's an interesting point. He's just sort of just like, he's really calling back to things that I get stuck on this one thing all the time, and I think about it too in terms of Transmigration of Timothy Archer. So I was at one point doing a bunch of research on ghosts, right, for a project I was working on. And a lot of people, a lot of people who, right after a loved one dies, they will be visited. Their experience is that they're visited by the ghost of that loved one, right? And the scientific community has taken all of these observations, all of these experiences, and they've boiled it down and said they've just decided that, well, it's just a biological fact that sometimes people have grief hallucinations. It's like, well, okay. So it doesn't mean anything then, right? There's nothing there.
It's like a less elegant way of saying ghost.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's so weird, but it's like, it's this way of just dismissing it. It's like, you just had a hallucination. Oh, okay. But it also maybe was the most profound thing that ever happened to me. It allowed me to get closure with my, my dead whoever. But it's just a grief hallucination, right? Same thing with this Transmigration of Timothy Archer.
That's a good name for a metal band.
Grief migration.
Grief migration, grief hallucination. That's good. Yeah. It's a little long, but I don't think it matters.
You put it in that crazy writing, you can't tell what it says anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of this is that, like, first of all, I mean, I think a lot of, like, if you visit the group chats, most people these days have made the joke about the feds being in the chat, and like we all kind of have a little bit of default paranoia. And I think, like, I also think that paranoia gets it generally has a completely negative connotation, when in fact, like, to have no paranoia at this point would probably be naive.
You're insane.
What I mean? Like,
you're naive or you're insane.
Yeah, it's a mental capacity. If it gets out of balance, sure, it can be, a problem. But I think, like, there's a certain amount that's kind of healthy. The thing that Dick does that's really interesting is that he elevates it to, like, not just, sort of worldly paranoia, but like ontological paranoia, where he doesn't trust his own senses and his own sort of processor, and kind of everything that's going on. And that's, like, as you said, like, that's the grand, like, that's the final conspiracy theory, the final guy.
Well, this is the thing. I don't think you should trust it.
Well, you can't. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's like embarrassed themselves on their own. Yeah, nice. Yeah. Kevin just is in space.
In
like,
space now. I believe
we
it
can see
wholeheartedly.
it. I mean, yeah, like why would you doubt it?
Yeah, now he's on the beach. Lovely, lovely.
Yeah.
But he does, and this is kind of part of it, I think, the appeal to him. It's sort of like, um, so Transmigration of Timothy Archer. I don't think we throw Philip K. Dick in this science fiction category because we don't know what else to do with him.
Mm-hmm.
Transmigration of Timothy Archer is not a science fiction novel at all. And it goes deeper than just there's no ray guns and spaceships and whatever. But like, to me, science fiction, I think people have problems with this definition. But to me, in the genre of science fiction, everything ultimately makes sense. You can rationally get yourself to whatever the thing is.
Well, if it's good science fiction.
Yeah, right. It's sort of it's kind of its job. It's an exploration of rationality in some way.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's like the rightful heir to the, like, this is just my sort of, maybe this is my hobby horse, but like to the American, what I call the romance tradition, which is Poe and Hawthorne and Melville and these guys that were like essentially symbolist writers, where if Poe's narrator kills his cat and then another cat shows up with like a similar marking, and then he kills his wife and walls her up in the, like, and it's all like the cat is clearly related to the conscience, and these things are like an exploration of the psyche or the soul or something like that. And I think Dick's version of science fiction always does that. I just threw in that caveat because like I've read some that I think is I call it fantasy, where it's just fantasy. It's like it's detached from our world. It's a fine way to spend your time, like playing a video game or something, but you're not going to learn about the nature of being human or, et cetera. Right. I think in Dick, you very often do. Interestingly, by the way, even before his big revelatory experience in 74, right? Like a lot of his work in the 60s feels prophetic in the same way that some of his later novels do. And it was before his sort of big pink beam experience, which is interesting. I don't know what to make of it.
He was having these mystical experiences before 2374. None of them were as big to him as that. He would have these. I mean, he had a vision of oh my gosh, the Palmer the guy, the figure that became Palmer Eldritch. He had a vision of that guy in the sky at one point, and he had various times where he felt like his sister was talking to him, his sister who'd been dead since infancy. And he one time prayed for the answers on a math test and got them. He was always kind of in touch with this stuff, and then it's sort of all like lined up and pushed him through this aperture that was 2374, and now he lived in completely unstable terrain, that had to be, they had to spend the rest of his life picking over. Yeah. It is interesting though that I was fascinated when you talk about his overall body of work, that the Valis trilogy comes out, which people who are listening to this should, if you haven't read it, should definitely read the Valis trilogy. I mean, it's one of the craziest pieces of American literature, but also impressive and an engaging read and like a satisfying read. But then Transmigration of Timothy Archer comes out, and it's like the least crazy to me. It's the least crazy of his works in a certain way, and maybe part of that is because I'm Wikipedia and Twitter brained. So like all those references we talked about, I can handle all that. That's fine.
Yeah, that's
fun to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read it in 1982, what that would have felt like.
That's a good question, actually. I do think it would have been sort of shocking. I mean, it's it would have been right on the edge for a lot of people at that time. But I agree with you though, that like it's very neatly structured. It reads like not like a novel, not, you don't have to at least for much of it. And I think
some of his best characters too, just in terms of sympathy,
very good characters. Yeah. And I think like I guess I would say, if nothing else, it's kind of solid evidence that like he's not out of his mind. Like he, you know what I mean? He hasn't lost mental function. He's a good thinker still. He's clear. It's just he's like a divergent thinker, you know?
That's kind of what I think alarms normies and why he's sort of shelved where he is, although he has crossed over into the mainstream, but principally through the films. Yeah, very curious. Are we ready to accept that we had a prophet walking among us of a Christian type who was cogent about it, writing voluminously on the subject, and is, within living memory? Is the church prepared for this?
I really think that the Christian church is in trouble until it seriously considers that question, like of Philip K.
Saint
I know that sounds crazy, but really, I think we're almost at that point, because that's what prophetic revelation might look like if it happened, So even if he was making it up, like that is what I think it would look like.
So. Jesus came back now, he'd be a Wikipedia editor. He'd be hyperlinking everything.
And
I don't mean that in a heretical way. I just think I said
earlier that he, PKD kind of I feel like kind of helped me feel saved in a sense that it reoriented my relationship to the big structures in the world, so that I understood I'm not necessarily red, white, and blue. That can go up or down, or be strong or fall apart, and I'm not that. I'm not attached to it, and I think that you can render unto Caesar or whatever, but there's some distance that I have on it all now, in part thanks to him.
Wow. Spoiler alert, it's gonna fall apart. It already has. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I'm excited to go further on the After Dark for Patreon listeners, patreon.com/ArtofDarkPod. Godward, where can people find you? You're on the Bird website. You have a blog.
Godward 16 on the Bird app, and that's enough. I don't really have more people.
Elon's chat room.
I love it. It's refreshing to not, we're just constantly trying to get people into our circle.
Well,
I love it.
Yeah. Part of that, by the way, is that I've it's sometimes too much for me. The people in my circle, it's I had to blow up a few group chats because
I get that. I get
one secret, if you want to get kicked off Twitter, is start posting a lot of guillotines.
Okay.
You'll be that's my secret. Use this one productivity hack.
People hate him. Twitter engineers hate him.
Yeah, right. I'm gonna leave this episode in the Aurora Borealis. That's where I'm gonna I like how my headphones screw with it. In any case, this has been great. We're going to do more.
Let me end this with, before we go to the After Dark, because in the After Dark we're going to talk more about Gnosticism relative to Philip K. Dick, the Harold Bloom's definition of Gnosticism and the American religion. We're gonna have pull some quotes. Let me leave us with something from Philip K. Dick. A quote from what is it? How to Build a Universe in 2 days, How to Build a Universe That Doesn't Fall Apart 2 days Later.
Yeah.
Let me just read a para from that. The basic tool for the manipulation of reality is the manipulation of words. If you can control the meaning of words, you can control the people who must use the words. George Orwell made this clear in his novel 1984. But another way to control the minds of people is to control their perceptions. If you can get them to see the world as you do, they will think as you do. Comprehension follows perception. How do you get them to see the reality you see? After all, it is only one reality out of many. Images are a basic constituent, pictures. This is why the power of TV to influence young minds is so staggeringly vast. Words and pictures are synchronized. The possibility of total control of the viewer exists, especially the young viewer. TV viewing is a kind of sleep learning. An EEG of a person watching TV shows that after about a half an hour, the brain decides that nothing is happening and it goes into a hypnoidal twilight state, emitting alpha waves. This is because there's such little eye motion. In addition, much of the information is graphic and therefore passes into the right hemisphere of the brain rather than being processed by the left, where the conscious personality is located. Recent experiments indicate that much of what we see on the TV screen is received on a subliminal basis. We only imagine that we consciously see what is there. The bulk of the messages elude our attention. Literally, after a few hours of TV watching, we do not know what we have seen. Our memories are spurious, like our memories of dreams. The blanks are filled in retrospectively and falsified. We have participated unknowingly in the creation of a spurious reality, and then we have obligingly fed it to ourselves. We have colluded in our own doom. So that's not happening anymore, of course.
Support Independent media.
That's right. Wow. We would never collude in your doom.
No.
No, thanks.
We would not.
Anyway, Art of Dark
like Pod. That. Brad, thank you so much for organizing this, for having Godward on. Godward, I'm looking forward to talking with you for another half an hour on the After Dark. Brad, any final words for the
No, that's it. That's it. That was so much fun. And yeah, man, I love having you on. Philip K. Dick was a clear episode for you to be on, and we've talked back channel for a while about it. And it's always just such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, we'll be back on the After Dark in just a few minutes. See ya. Okay. I'm going to try not to fall into some hallucinatory fever dream on my way downstairs.
Yeah. What do we got? 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's 5 minutes between? What's time anyway?
I'll be right back.